And sometimes it didn't come to fruition for years. One of the most famous ones was Michael Jackson audio animatronic figure, right? Which you're like, there's no such thing, correct? That never came to fruition. But a heck of a lot of the technology that went into developing a character that could move like that did. That was the Parcos, the original partnership with Sarcos, which was the compliant valve company, the compliant servos. That technology is used in all advanced AA figures now. So even if whatever you're working on doesn't become a thing, the bits and bobs that put it together are always of value.
That is Imagineer M.K. Haley, and you're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hey there, thanks for joining me here on episode 206 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. If you are someone that is interested in ideas that are currently shaping the themed entertainment industry, if you go on YouTube and search for M.K. Haley, you will find a lot of great presentations at TEDx and for other educational institutions that she has given speeches on the experience economy, on Santa Claus, on storytelling, so many interesting topics. And this all stems from MK's more than 25 years working at Walt Disney Imagineering. Started out as an intern on the Aladdin VR attraction at Epcot. If you remember that at Innoventions, it ultimately ended up at Disney Quest. She also worked at Disney Research on R&D, on FX, interactive work for TV, and academic outreach. And that's where her career, she has spent a lot of time working directly for and interacting with institutions like Carnegie Mellon. She worked at Florida State. She currently works for the University of Texas at Austin. And so she approaches topics related to themed entertainment in such an interesting way because she is talking to students, understanding how they consume entertainment, how they approach the work. It's very different than someone who has worked on projects for Imagineering and hasn't spent as much time with kind of the next generations. And I found that so fascinating talking to MK, who is a great storyteller and has a lot of cool background about what has come up. She studied computer animation at a time when that really wasn't something that schools offered. So she was at the forefront of that and remains kind of front and center with some of the technologies and approaches that are on the cutting edge of the industry. So let's get right to it. Here is M.K. Haley. MK, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for creating awesome content.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I'm excited because you've worked in so many interesting avenues of Imagineering and also just on the education side, which isn't that common with people I've spoken with that have worked in academic outreach and some of the other areas you've worked in. But I'd love to know at first, because I know you study computer animation at a very early time for that. So I'm curious what got you interested. I mean, we're talking late 80s, early 90s. Like, how did you get interested in computer animation?
When I was in grade school and high school, I always did well in art classes, ribbons here and there. And when it came time to study at university, my parents actually encouraged me to go into the arts, which felt nuts. Like, whose parents are like, be an art major, kid? And all of us, everyone in my family paid for their own college. So I don't know why they thought they had a vote. But I'm like, all right, I think I'll look at this, maybe from a graphic design angle, right? Because I know graphic designers get hired. And I did a little research on computers. My high school, my senior year, got a computer lab. And I'm like, these computer things might hang around. I should know about them. And I found a program at UMass Amherst. I was a Massachusetts kid that had a computer animation program. At the time, it wasn't yet accredited. So it was bits and bobs from the School of Computer Science, the School of Electrical Engineering, the School of Fine Arts. We had to take a bus and take a class at Smith College in differential equations. But they sort of hodgepodge this program together. Copper Gilliff was the artist who set it up. And it was 5 people who graduated with me in 1990 with a BFA in computer animation. And we were the first artists to do that in the world, as far as we know. Computer scientists have been doing a bit hither and yon before that, but as a BFA. And so in many ways, that mishmash that I got at the time is better than what you can get now, right? Because I had to go across campus to the engineering building, which meant I was connected to that community. I had to take a class in large scale welding in a cabin in the forest behind campus, right? And so like, I mean, I think every young lady should know how to arc weld. So it was a very cross-disciplinary program. And around my junior year, Pixar was doing ads. They were doing the squeezy, the jelly lifesaver ads, and a few other things were happening. I'm like, ooh, like that's cool. I can't do that. I'm not that good yet. We were working on Amigas and a VAX 11780. So then I knew I wanted to look into grad schools to get better at this thing that I liked. It was art and it was technology and it was interesting. So I had seen some really great stuff coming out of UC Santa Cruz. There was two gentlemen who did a funny little video called Where's Frank? And it was just a 3D model against beautiful 2D backgrounds, little spaceship flying around. And so I applied there for a graduate program. Well, those two gentlemen were in the School of Mechanical Engineering. They had nothing to do with art, or they just had computers who could do it. So UC Santa Cruz sent my application to another school, sent it to Cal State LA. And so I was both accepted by and graduated from a school I never applied to. And that program was really well set up. They had a very tight connection with SIGGRAPH, which is an industry association, special interest group in computer graphics and interactive technologies. They had a partnership with JPL, NASA. And so the interconnection of art and technology has always sort of been a default in my education. And while I was at grad school, again, I'm a kid from Massachusetts. I had never been to a theme park, didn't know anyone who had been to a theme park. And that's when Imagineering came knocking on our door at Cal State LA, and they invited students to participate in this new design competition. And so at the time I was doing computer animation and dabbling in real-time stuff. And so I submitted a proposal based on Aladdin, a VR kind of attraction, which was in development, which of course I didn't know. And so I was hired as an intern as a result of that competition to support the Aladdin lab down at Epcot. Man, talk about being in a place where I felt I wasn't worthy, because everybody else who did this student design competition, they're like, oh, I've wanted to be here since I was 4. And I'm like, I've never even heard of this place. But I was there for 27 years. So towards the end there, I'm like, no, yeah, I do belong here.
You mentioned getting connected to like the design competition. I mean, you mentioned you hadn't been to a theme park, but I mean, were you aware at all of Imagineering before that point, or of your education? Seems like that you were setting yourselves up for Imagineering even though you hadn't been there. So I'm curious if you had any background on what they did or even had thought about it.
Nope. I never even heard of it. And so, yeah, but then when I was there, what's interesting is there was quite a bit of pushback, both at my undergrad and my graduate school, on artists using technology. We had a key in a locker to access the electrical engineering computer labs, and we could only use them from midnight to 6 a.m. because the engineering students had priority. And then when I was in grad school, there's this one class that all grad students have to take to teach you how to write a thesis. So you're in there with sculptors, photographers, all the fine art majors. And they hated me. They said I was bastardizing art by having technology typey instead of, my hands crafting it. So as an undergrad, the engineers didn't like me. As a grad student, the artists didn't like me. I showed up at Imagineering. John DeSantis, who was at Imagineering, was the gentleman who interviewed me. And he's like, let me get this straight. You're an art major who can code on a Unix box? Where the blank have you been? And I'm like, here, right? I'm here now. And so then I'm like, these are my people, right? Like I was ostracized and mocked, and now these are my people. And now, for a while, it was very important that you knew that my degree was computer animation. That's absurd now, right? Because the expectation is that even if you're doing hand cell or claymation, you understand how computers work for that process. So it's just become the norm.
Yeah. And you mentioned too, coming up with your Aladdin VR idea and then ultimately working on that, which felt very new at the time when it was at Epcot. So what was your experience like actually getting in there and working on, as an intern with this attraction?
First of all, it was a world-class team. John Snoddy, Eric Hazeltine, and Scott Watson. What an amazing group of creatives. And first of all, it's a no-brainer. If you saw the movie, flying through that movie makes a lot of sense. So it wasn't particularly a creative genius. But particularly since at that point I had been well involved with SIGGRAPH, since 1989. I was involved with SIGGRAPH. So I had seen some of the stuff Silicon Graphics was doing, some motion bases and the like. And so we pitched our contest submission. We make the finals. We go in and we're pulled out. The kids are all getting a tour of something. And some guy in a suit came and tapped me on the shoulder. He said, you need to come out here and talk to me. And so there was 3 folks on my team because you had to be a team entry. And they said, whose idea was this? And the other 2 said, we had nothing to do with it. She just needed 3, so we put our names on it. I'm like, well, I appreciate that you're saying that out loud, gentlemen. So like, all right, you 2 go back in the room. You come with us. And they threw me in this little electric van and drove me across to R&D. And I went to a little conference room and they said, explain where the idea came from and how it all evolved. And I had all my sketches, right? And stuff that we hadn't solved and such. And they're like, okay, Variety had gotten wind that they were working on a VR type thing and they were worried that there was a leak somewhere. But I was able to show, nope, like here's where the idea came from and here's how it evolved, which is very different than. So then they showed it to me after I proved I hadn't stolen anything. That was Trevor Bryant and Dave Fink. Then they're like, oh, phew, okay, kid, look behind the curtain, right? And so to see, I'm like, ooh. And we had a great conversation about solving one particular issue with how a head-mounted display might fit a 3-year-old to a 90-year-old. And they're like, well, we solved that. I'm like, well, yay, you're a team of 200 Imagineers. I'm a kid. But I appreciated that once we had that sort of foundational conversation, they're like, you're in. And they gave me a tour of how it all worked. And then they were setting up that lab at Epcot Center, which again, that shows my age that I still call it Epcot Center, which was to test this theory, right? Because nobody had ever tried to tell a story in VR. VR was used as a simulation for training purposes, mostly flight at the time. And there had to be some sort of consensus that this would be feasible as an attraction. And Innoventions at Epcot, that's what that section was all about, was next gen technology, near future stuff. And so it fit nicely into that. So they opened a lab there. They had 6 of us grad students manning it. And each one of us was a different flavor of Imagineering. I randomly happened to be the VR person, but we had a mechanical engineer, we had a show writer, we had an MBA. So that were a little bit of a microcosm of Imagineering. We were the first Imagineers ever on display. 2 weeks in California, who the board of directors was, like, because we knew guests would be poking us. We had PR training. So our job was to give guests a little bit of a tour, a walk through our lab, which was a very accurate recreation of the lab in Glendale. And then we flew 4 guests on the Aladdin Magic Carpet Ride, and 75,000 guests flew and were surveyed on that attraction between July 1st of 94 and September 15th of 95. Way more guests saw the attraction, right? But 75,000. And to date, it is still the largest VR survey. In 1996, John Snoddy and Randy Pausch wrote a research paper on that, if anyone wants. And people still refer to it because human nature hasn't changed. Like what our field of view is and such hasn't changed. So it's still very useful. So that was quite cool, right? It was an internship. It was a 6-month internship deep into what I was interested in with some really amazing people in a theme park, right? And they gave us uniforms, which was the Imagineering polo shirts that they couldn't sell. So we would get like a couple shipments of the most god-awful colors, mustard yellow, anything like pink or bright, because it was 5 gentlemen and me. They're like, pink, that's you. XXL, right? But we were branded. And it was really a great experience, a lovely experience. They extended me to 9 months. They extended me to a year. And at that point, I was ABD, all but dissertation, for my graduate work. And I knew the lab was closing in September. And so I'm like, how about we hire this student who's working for us as a operations. She's really great. That's like a nice story about a career path. You start working operations and then you get to be an intern on the attraction. And then I can go back to California and graduate. And John Snoddy said, sure, but if you're coming back to California, why don't we just hire you here? And so I'm like, best job interview ever, right? So I never left. I started as an intern. I never left. I took a red eye home on a Sunday night and started work at 8 a.m. in the VR studio in Glendale the next day. And 27 years later was still making magic.
Yeah, wow, that's so interesting how you ended up there and how your career started. But when you were working in Glendale then and your kind of your full-time role, what were some of the things you were doing at that time after you joined in the mid-90s?
So for a hot second, I was 3D modeling animation. We had just rolled over from a more of a rigid modeling system to new Alias. Alias was pretty new at the time. It gave you a much softer size, looked more like the cartoon. So I was working on that, but that was just a hot minute when pretty quickly they're like, you're well organized. You're going to be a producer, which felt like a big promotion, right? I got to connect with everybody on the project and different sort of nuances. And so for a long time, I was project management producer, connecting my team with other resources. We're building Disney Quest at the time, until Aladdin had gone into there. Still very much a liaison to the lab in Florida that closed, a few months later. And then R&D absorbed VR. And so lock, stock, and barrel short, we all moved across campus to R&D. And then once I moved to R&D, I got to put my fingers in a much wider range of stuff. My titles have included both creative director and technical director. And that's just the nature of the business, right? It's a project-based universe, and you sort of morph around to wherever they need you to be. Mm-hmm. And R&D is what a luxury, right? R&D touches everything. Maybe, I can point to a light bulb and say, I found the vendor that makes that. You're welcome. So it's nothing giant like the folks who have committed, 3 to 5 years on a land, but with your fingers a little bit every single pie, you do get a nice broad overview of what's going on in California and in Central Florida. And so that was a really great group, unusually connected to the rest of the company as compared to some of the other groups. And again, I waffle between producery, project coordinator type roles. At one point, I managed all of our relationships with third-party research labs because we're always interested in what technology they're using. At one point, I had to reinvent our still film library, which is our projected effects, which was on Kodachrome, which is no longer made, right? How do you solve those problems? So in 27 years, I had 19 bosses. So there's quite a bit of waffling in and around projects, but it's easier to get those opportunities when you're in R&D and people knew who you were and what you did. If you're isolated on one project team in one building for years, it can sometimes be hard when that's over to figure out where you're going. The first time I saw a formal effort, Tokyo Disney Seas, because that's out of sight, out of mind, right? They're in Japan.
Right.
About 6 months before everyone's due date to wrap up and move back to the States, they had an advocate in the States reminding people, oh, you have this open artist position. So-and-so is coming back in 4 months. Should we just slot them in there, or did you want to hire a new person? And that worked pretty well. But it is surprising that it was that long before that model happened, where people were like, no, we don't need to hire a new person. This person over here knows what they're doing. They're coming back.
So you mentioned having different bosses and people moving in and out, but you were in there for a while. What was it about your perspective or skills, or why did that seem to be such a good fit for you to work in R&D?
Because I could easily speak across art and technology, and I'm very diplomatic, which I didn't realize it was, right? Until people would say, you keep the peace pretty good, you keep meetings on track, a lot of the old yes and sort of mindset. Mm-hmm. I've always considered myself, and especially R&D, as service providers. We work in service to other people. And so we're not the bosses of anyone, right? We work to make what you want happen. And so that's a very particular mindset that I think works. I also spent plenty of time sweeping floors. I am certified in the state of California to drive a man lift, a forklift, and a boat crane, which comes in useful, right? And so that sort of diversity of skills is a value.
So, when you're in R&D, though, I imagine a lot of the work you do just never, the public never sees it. How is that when you're working there, when you know that you're exploring all these technologies? Some will come to fruition, some might not ever really be used by Disney.
It's interesting because when we bought Pixar, Ed Catmull called me, who, again, how do I know Ed Catmull? Because I worked with SIGGRAPH for years and we sat in meetings planning stuff. So that was a luxury that a kid like me shouldn't have had, but we were friendly. And he says, MK, this was right after Disney bought Pixar. He says, why don't we have research? I'm like, we do have research. It's over there. And he goes, no, that's actually advanced development. And I'm like, ooh, he's right. Because Walt Disney Imagineering R&D is not designing cures for cancer, right? They're very focused on very specific business needs. About 50% of the projects were specific asks from the park, more robust materials, lower cost, lower energy using lights, things like that. And about 50% were us having an expertise in a particular technology or trend and mocking it up and showing it to them. The PhD carrying, clipboard wielding, thinking 25 years out, that was less of what we had. And so Ed Catmull helped start Disney Research. So there's two groups now, Disney Research, which serves the entire Walt Disney Company. About 50% of the portfolio was parks and resorts, and WDI R&D. So a large chunk of what R&D did, we did see because it was either a specific ask or a technology that we catered to. And sometimes it didn't come to fruition for years. One of the most famous ones was Michael Jackson audio animatronic figure, right? Which you're like, there's no such thing, correct. That never came to fruition. But a heck of a lot of the technology that went into developing a character that could move like that did. That was the Parcos, the original partnership with Sarcos, which was the compliant valve company, the compliant servos. That technology is used in all advanced AA figures now. So even if whatever you're working on doesn't become a thing, the bits and bobs that put it together are always of value.
Yeah, so you mentioned Disney Research. Could you talk a little bit more about what that group does? Because I mean, I understand R&D a little more, but like Disney Research, kind of what's the difference there?
So it's interesting. DisneyResearch.com, all their research is published, which is out like remarkable, right? Because R&D doesn't publish their business. But one of the ways that you evaluate proficiency and expertise in the research community is peer evaluation. So journal reviews, presentations at conferences, and the way you do that is you have to publish. So that was a remarkable effort through HR and operations, whoever who made that possible. So Ed Catmull's all like, we're going to have Disney Research. Yay! And he hired Joe Marks, who's lovely. He was a professor at Harvard, and he worked at Merle, the Mitsubishi Electronics Research Labs in Cambridge. He hired him to come on board and head this up. And he did all the interviews, and he talked to really cool people. And he's like, hey, y'all, come work for Disney. And they're all like, nope. And he's like, what do you mean, nope? We're awesome. They're like, we're all tenured professors. Like, why would we give up tenure at Carnegie Mellon, MIT, UC Irvine, right? Why would we give up tenure to go to the unstable industry? And also, we got no friends there. Like, when you're a campus professor, you have a lot of affiliations and alignments with cool people. So the proposal was, okay, let's go where you are. So the first two labs we set up were at EHZ in Zurich, Switzerland. Mark's Gross runs that lab, and then Carnegie Mellon's campus in Pittsburgh. Carnegie Mellon had an expertise in computer graphics, machine vision, and robotics, which we cared all about. And the team at ETH in Zurich was doing some pretty amazing work with also machine vision, video imaging, projection, and things like that. So we took the jobs where the people were and where the people wanted to be. Again, whoever figured out how to write up contracts to where people were 50% professor, 50% Disney researcher, bless their heart. I live in Texas now, so I can say that. Bless their hearts that they figured that out. But they did. And as a result, it's been a remarkably productive group. Shortly thereafter, maybe 4 or 5 years after that, we decided we did actually need a location at the mothership in Glendale. Disney Research Los Angeles, which is really Glendale, opened up to sort of have somewhere much closer to all the other operational units. And for a very short amount of time, we had a lab in Cambridge directly. The first two labs were on college campuses. The lab in Cambridge was between MIT and Harvard, and that worked really well, but it was very small, and it was hard to keep it sustainable as such a tiny little lab. So those folks were all offered relocation to whichever lab they chose. But today, the two labs still exist: the ETH Zurich and the lab at Imagineering in Glendale. They share the same building with R&D. Right, like when I say that they're very similar, very like they have the same bathroom. Right? They're very closely connected. Their job is long-term research and also like the little bit of research in the middle, not the whole story. Quickly, the rule first right off the bat was PhDs only, and I fought that. I'm like, you know what PhDs are terrible at? PowerPoint. They sometimes struggle in communicating in an effective way what is great about the thing they invented or what possible applications there are for it. So in our Pittsburgh lab, we were allowed to hire one artist, Mo Mailer. He's brilliant. He was working on the Panda 3D technology that Disney had donated to Carnegie Mellon. And then immediately we're like, oh, no, yeah, we need more of him. So we hired him full time and he hired a whole staff. So they make the 3D models beautiful to demonstrate a particular concept. They make the presentations and the research papers that are presented to conferences. They make them beautiful. And then not that long afterwards, man, everybody likes being in the field, right? Everyone likes driving down at midnight to the park to install your thing in a tree or whatever. And so the original budgeting was 100% research, but they morphed that to 90% research, 10% in the field, picking up the phone, answering weird calls from people. And people loved that. And then shortly after that, we swapped that. And there were some folks brought on who were 90% install the thing in the field, and 10% research, because no matter what you invent, if nobody's using it, you haven't invented it. Right? It's of no value to the Walt Disney Company or anyone else. So bridging that gap from the high-end research to a push button transition, that's what those folks did. So it's really nice to see that it evolved over years. I mean, the Walt Disney Company is a publicly traded company, so there are some obligations about returns to investors, but also they have way more leeway than anyone else because they all research. And one of the most remarkable things is that they're sitting next to people who can't talk about what they do. And Disney Research, DisneyResearch.com, all their work is published.
Wow. Yeah, I'm going to have to check that out further. I looked at it a bit before we talked. Did you have any experience like going out in the field? You mentioned that the group would. Did you have any memorable times being out in the field for
Yeah. And
various projects?
it's interesting, invaluable, right? Like you can't learn anything. First, when I was working at Epcot, right, I was in the park. Guests saw me every day. I couldn't grow a mustache, right? All the rules. And that guest experience, like it's invaluable. What do guests care about? How behaviors differ when it's raining or when it's 110 degrees, right? That all matters. And then I went back to R&D and we did a lot of guest testing. After 9/11, we took a massive hit. In my group, I ran a group called ATR at the time, Advanced Technology Research. That was our partnerships with third-party research labs, military folks, 3M. And that whole team went. And I was packing up because I was laid off for 30 seconds. And I got a call from special effects that said, keep packing because you're moving, but you're moving over to special effects. You're not leaving the company. And so that was much closer to the guest, right? We're doing some experimental effects. So that was more crawling around in ductwork and hanging up stuff, and also figuring out replacement technologies because a lot of the film, ilfochrome and photochrome were disappearing. So what's a viable solution? We did a lot of research on 4-layer vacuum deposition, permanent slides instead of film-based slides. So that required a lot of testing and installation. So that was super fun. And then I was invited to go to our SQS team, which is in the field. Every park has an SQS team of Imagineers in trailers out behind the park. It's very glamorous. And you are partners with maintenance, right? You are dirty in the field every day, all day. So that is very close to the guest experience. And a friend of mine, Tom LeDuc, had gotten a promotion, and they asked him to replace himself. And he's like, gosh, darn it. So he's like, hey, want to work in Anaheim? And I talked to my boss because I really loved what I was doing at Effects. It would have been a promotion for me. And my boss is like, good news. We're having a layoff on Friday. If you take this job, one of your friends doesn't get laid off.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, oh, okay, that's easy. So then I went to SQS, which was, some of the R&D stuff, which was years removed from the guest interface. Now I was part of the team that would evacuate people in an emergency. You're walking in the park, you're walking from the parking structure through, you smell the smells, you see the things that go down, you see operations frustration, right? If something goes down and Imagineering's rule is then the attraction goes down, they're like, it's a Saturday in June. We can't close anything. Right. Just throw a shroud over it. So you developed a much better relationship with your park partners there. Yeah, and I really appreciate all those levels of the types of work and the different levels of guest service or attraction that they contributed to.
Yeah, the show quality standards. I mean, that's like you mentioned, like some of the recent attractions where like they have a B mode where it's like the Navi Shaman where it's like, wait, I have to blink at it. Like, okay, that's it's very, or they cover someone up or whatever. But I want to make sure to ask you, you referenced Carnegie Mellon, like your academic outreach side, because I know you've done so much for that. How did you get involved with that? Because you were still at Disney. This wasn't just another part of your career. It was at Disney.
Yeah, people think I'm 3 times as old as I am. This is an industry where there's no straight path, and you sort of jump at opportunities where they arrive, or maybe even suggest them yourself. So when I was in grad school, they made you teach, right? All grad students are TAs. And as more and more people were interested in visiting Imagineering or touring Imagineering, and this could be, the Boys and Girls Club of America or Make-A-Wish, whatever, or a possible vendor partner. Also, Disney Way 1 was an interesting program. It was a 5-day program. It was like a 7-year waiting list where you started as far away from the guest as possible. I think you were in finance or music. And then each day you got closer. And then the very last day you were a character in costume in the park. But you couldn't get close to the guest. So I was the one who hosted some of the Imagineering R&D lectures on that. So then you're just like, okay, MK is the person who will lecture for people. She knows not to tell secrets. She can talk for 3 hours and not actually tell anything, which is useful skill sometimes. And so then that sort of morphed into, we have a 3 hour workshop at some local school or whatever. And each one still PR had to buy off. It wasn't that I was bought off. Every single request had to be considered, evaluated, and approved. And then we had more specific sorts of opportunities. After 9/11, Eric Hazeltine, who was head of R&D at the time, he says, we need to put our money where our mouth is. We can't just give money to schools. Let's give them bodies. And so he decided we'd start teaching a class at UCLA, which they still teach to this day. So from 2002 to now, that class has been taught every year. And it was both giving back to the community, but also a pipeline. It was a pipeline of great talent. They're on quarters, so it was 2 weeks, a 20-week commitment for us. So Bruce Vaughn and I started teaching that. I taught it for several years. Then I rolled out to another group that didn't support the time that would take. And then I came back in like 2018. I had been in Florida for 4 years, and I just jumped right back in and started teaching the class again. So then I kind of became known as the person who understands curriculum, the person who understands how do you meet federal requirements for a degree program and such. A lot of the classes were survey-based. We'd have guest speakers. They called Imagineering and said, we're looking to develop online communities of fans. And we know that Imagineering is good about building dimensional spaces for fans. So they loaned me for a year and a half to help advise on those projects when Disney Television started streaming. And my first three biggies we worked on were Dancing with the Stars, Lost, and Greek, which was an ABC family show. And how do you build community with that? So that was cool, mucking around there. Meanwhile, I was very close to the Carnegie Mellon program. Randy Pausch, who was co-chair, was dying of pancreatic cancer. Disney, Hyperion, published his book on it, the last lecture. He had been calling me for a long time, asking me to teach. And I'm like, and do what? He's like, just BMK. I'm like, that's not a job, Randy. Randy, I got to know him when he took a sabbatical and worked on the Aladdin project with us. So he was embedded in a VR studio in Glendale for probably 7 months. And gathering research that he then published. So we paid him $1. So he was an employee and he had a card, like he had a badge. But he was doing this as a sabbatical project. And we've been very friendly ever since. And so I said, maybe I would love teaching at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, but you need to tell me where are your gaps and how am I the guy to fill that, right? And so then he called and he says, it's my job. I'll be dead in a few months. So engineers are very upfront with their reality. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, actually, I do know what your job is. I do like your job. I could do that. But it's academia, right? So it was like 14 months out. I wasn't going to tell Disney I was leaving 14 months in advance. Meanwhile, we had just started Disney Research. We had spun up a lab on Carnegie Mellon's campus, and we had spun up a lab in Zurich. And Joe Marks, who ran them, he's like, MK, he's Irish. So he's like, what are the feckin' chances? That was more Scottish. But he's like, what are the chances you want to move to Pittsburgh and help run that lab? He's like, not full time, just like 1 or 2 days a week. And I'm all like, well, funny you should mention, I've just signed a lease to move to Pittsburgh. And not anywhere in Pittsburgh, that campus. And he's like, what? So I thought in the back of my head that I might be separating from the Walt Disney Company to take this job as co-chair of the Entertainment Technology Center, which is a graduate program. And I didn't. I moved out there and was able to keep both gigs. The lab didn't need... they're smart folks, right? They just didn't know anything about the Walt Disney Company. So I was sort of their liaison. Somebody would pitch something great and I'd say, that is cool. Has ESPN seen it? And they'd say, do we own ESPN? And so that liaisonship then became my goal, my role as I was teaching full time. So I was at Carnegie Mellon for about 4 years. And they went back because then that's when they wanted to open the lab in LA. They're like, okay, this Pittsburgh lab is working pretty good. The Zurich lab is working pretty good. We need to get another lab back in Glendale, LA area to support those teams. So yeah, I've driven cross country quite a few times.
Oh yeah. What interests you so much about being in, I know you went to school and got degrees, but you seem to always kind of, your perspective goes that way.
Yeah, it's interesting how, whether it's a 3-day workshop or teaching one class a semester or full-time, like I am doing now, or like I did at Carnegie Mellon when I was still a Disney employee, man, I learned so much from the students, from the process of preparing for them. I did a lecture Monday night. We have a class on the business of entertainment. And I'm always peripherally aware, right? But except twice a year, spring and fall semesters, I prepare a research report for these students on what is the state of the union in themed entertainment. And so then I get smarter on those sorts of topics that I might just be peripherally aware of, but because I have to report back to them, and, I always try and make it local. So I was really excited to talk about the new Meow Wolf that's here up in Grapevine in Texas, a 2 or 3 hour drive. We got a Peppa the Pig park coming. We have a Universal Studios has announced, all within half a day's drive around here. So I pull very local things to talk to them. So I learn from them. 2 of my students in my class, we're on week 2 of the semester right now. 2 of them said, I saw you speak in that class last year and had to take your class. So I very much like the interconnectedness of it all. And also, like, every once in a while, I am surprised. And I'm like, but stop being surprised. Like, if this is their honest reality, you can't be like, in my day, right? You have to change what the reality is. The TEA, Theme Entertainment Association, has 2 events every year. One is SATE, Storytelling, Architecture, Technology, and Experience Design. And that's a bit of a buffet of a lot of interesting topics happening in the industry. That is happening in Kansas City this year. Early bird registration closes on the 31st of August. And then in the springtime, there's the Thea Awards and Summit, which is a deep drill into award-winning projects, a fancy gala, a nice dinner, and like. So it's a nice 1-2 punch, a deep celebration of particular attractions and shows, and a bit of a buffet on, hey, what's upcoming drone technology? So that's coming up. And we just added a 3rd day for students, SATE Academy, we're calling it, on Saturday. The event is Thursday and Friday. And there's a whole day of programming on Saturday for students. Last year, we were in Vegas. 2 out of about 60 students took notes. And I'm all like, how dare you? I was like, what the? These people on their own time and their own dime are here to lecture to you, and you can't even respect them enough to take a note. And I would tell students, why aren't you taking notes? And the most consistent response I got was, I'm just here to absorb. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. But it's a high enough percentage of them who are just there to absorb when we really need them to insert, digest, grok, and converse about this stuff. So after the conference, I said, let's figure out what these kids want. And so we did a survey of all attendees, and they would like more how to, like, how does a thing go from concept to construction to installation operation? Done. We got permission from Universal is doing a lecture on that. But some of them said, nobody told me, how to dress. Nobody told me I should have a resume or a business card. And half of my brain is screaming, you're a senior in college. Why should I have had to tell you that? But the other half of my brain is like 2 out of 60, right? Like for whatever reason, whoever's fault or why, students are not getting the information they need to succeed. And so I just finished putting together a before, during, and after checklist for participants. How do you prepare yourself best for this? How do you behave? What are the sorts of things you do on site? And then what do you do after the fact? And it would like never even be on my radar that why am I not getting a lot of resumes for a posted position? Why am I not getting a lot of qualified resumes? Is because way further down the pipeline, students aren't getting what they needed. And then another situation we had this spring, we really struggled, not just me, every university is struggling with participation and engagement. There's actually a term for it, social loafing. Students are actively disengaging even from things they used to like. And it's not a lazy thing, right? There's something going on culturally, socially, mentally. And so we struggle. We had a huge event, 5-6 years ago, no problem. 40 students would descend and help pull this event off, running cables, taking tickets, things like that. Nobody couldn't get a single helper, even students in the major, even students who work was being shown. We tried offering extra credit or regular credit, and they're like, just take the 5 points. I don't want it. So again, I'm surveying the students. The number one most consistent answer, and they were shocked that it shocked me, was, you better pay us. And I'm like, that is such a different expectation than I'm used to. And this is for their own class. This isn't a third-party thing. This is their work that they're celebrating in this showcase or event type format. And they expect to be paid if it happens outside the classroom. And none of them were shocked by that. And I'm like, okay, so we have completely different lenses on this. And if that is what is I need to do a little research, right? But if that is what's the norm on this, we need to figure out how to make that work. And like none of this would even be on my radar if I didn't have these daily conversations. My biggie, where we're like, you're a genius. I'm like, I'm not a genius. I sit next to college kids. So this was when I was first at Carnegie Mellon. This was 2009. They were all watching, the Napster. They were streaming their music and their TV quite illegally. The only thing that they cared about that was live sporting events, which still you couldn't really stream those. You had to have TV. They all had 2 monitors. One was where they were doing their work, and the other was their media that they were streaming from somewhere. And so then I'm working with Disney Television, ABC, and I'm like, this is not how people are getting content. People are not turning in channel 4, at 8 p.m. on Thursday night for their comedies. Like the model has changed. And they're like, no, you're hanging around nerds. You're with grad students at CMU. That's not a real world lens. And I'm like, it is. It is a real world lens. So several years later, someone's like, I think MK mentioned this was going to happen. And they're like, how did you know? And I'm like, I had eyeballs. Right? I was just looking at what was happening around me. And there's 1,000,001 examples of where the students teach me things, teach me how they're navigating the world and what tools they're using. I mean, for the first time this semester, the university gave us verbiage on AI, right? That's not a conversation we never had to have in the classroom about how to use it. I added it middle of last term. So maybe March-ish of this year, I started talking about it to my students. It's now officially mandated university policy in that. So things change real fast. And you have to have honest conversations about appropriate uses, inappropriate uses, and what are the consequences, an F or expulsion, right? Things like that. And you and I, who chose a very dynamic industry, it's never static. So it's always cool, interesting things going on. And we always have to update the syllabus.
Well, yeah. I mean, so, with theme and entertainment, especially, this is very different than when you started, where now there's all these people that are zoned in on, they've experienced these parks, or and there are courses like from many colleges. And it's still a challenge? Because like you had a case where you were an intern and basically just got right into it based on just kind of circumstances. Is it hard?
Being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, for sure. Is it hard for students to bridge that gap? Because I'm sure a lot of people are really enthusiastic, but to learn, kind of like what you were referencing a minute ago, how to ultimately work and do these projects, even based on school. Like, is there a challenge with getting them ready to actually work, especially given just the changing industry with all these smaller companies and projects, and it's just very different?
Yeah, and there's different folks taking different whacks at this. So one organization that I work with that's fairly new, TEAAS, not to be confused with the TEA. The TEAAS is Themed Experience and Attractions Academic Society. And this is very specifically a group aimed to support faculty in this sphere. What consistencies do there need to be? What differentiates your program from something else? And a lot of the consistencies this collective has come across are soft skills. Because if you're an engineer in this industry versus a sculptor, like those are very, very different, right? That is a well-known discipline, and there are schools and programs that do that. The soft skills to allow you to thrive in this industry are what are very consistent and what may be different than roles elsewhere. Knowing how to work on multidisciplinary collaborative teams, the nature of a third shift type of work, right? Like there's a lot of folks, graphic designers who never work third shift, but if you're doing signage or something like that in our industry, you do work third shift. The ability to do original research to inform your projects. I was just reviewing some student work, and they did sort of a haunted house based experience based on the Salem witch trials. And they had no idea that those were real people. And I'm a Massachusetts person. I know the Crucible real well. And Abigail Williams, who was a character they were talking about, she was very much a spinning head, split pea soup, barfing exorcist kind of character. And I'm like, whoa. I'm like, the Salem Tourism Board is like spinning in their grave right now. And it quickly became aware that not only did they not know she was a real person, they didn't know she was a child. She was 14 when this all went down. And that's just basic research. Like, how did you not know that? So the ability to do basic research to credibly inform your projects is another consistent skill set. And then the ability to present your work, how to pitch, how to creatively put together the 3-second version, the 30-minute, the 3-minute, and the 3-hour, right? Those are all skill sets, no matter what you're doing, you need to be good at. And so we're getting better at making sure these programs know this. And even, for 2,000 years, themed experiences have existed without a degree. So you could be a blank and just understand this layer, this multidisciplinary, collaborative, research-based effort, and then add to it your museums, zoos, aquariums who have another layer of credibility on there, right? They're not telling fairy tales. They're telling real world stories about real conservation efforts. So how do you keep that credibility? So and we're kind of evolving to a place where There's some agreement as to what the key skill sets are. The program that's pretty recent at University of Florida, UF, it's actually in an Orlando campus, not a Gainesville campus. They didn't put pencil to paper on the curriculum for a year. Once a month for a year, they had meetings with folks from each major studio. And we're like, hey, what's up, iTech? What's up, Universal? Like, we're all besties in that room. They asked us what we need, what industry needs. And then based upon those conversations, they put together curriculum. So we didn't have anything to respond to. We told them what our wishes were, and they put together a program. It's through the School of Engineering and Construction and Architecture, right? So it's got that bent, but it very smartly acquiesced to what the industry's hopes and dreams were. And there's a lot of people in this space who were filling those gaps. He looked out there and there wasn't a lot there. You could go to individual companies which just listed their jobs. So themedentertainmentjobs.com is a completely volunteer run job board that he set up to fill the gap that he saw for himself as a student entry level. I have created several resources for my students because there was a gap. One is called MK's Big Ugly Google Doc of Awesome Things. It's big, it's ugly, and it's full of awesome things because this stuff just wasn't available. So the larger companies have more consistent and robust intern programs, right? Every X months. Imagineering has already posted their internships for the spring semester. So week 1 of my fall semester, I'm like, sorry to break it to you. It's time to apply for jobs for next semester. But a lot of these other smaller studios, who work quarter to quarter, which is the vast majority of our industry, right, are those studios. They're going to post them a little bit later. So sort of keeping aware of who is doing what and going to these job boards like the one that Dave Hall had put together are where students find that. We are lucky that we're a very gracious industry. Nobody has ever said no to me. My students we have about 20 industry folks who come speak on campus, and they have to go to 3 of them and answer just 5 simple questions. I said, or if none of these are a flavor you like, tell me what flavor you want and I'll introduce you to that person. This is Wednesday of week 2. 6 of them have been set up so far, and the students are asking for bananas stuff. One kid who's a bouncer at the local pub, he says, he's like, first of all, everybody wants to punch me. Drunken college boys want to punch me. And he says, and my coworkers are happy to punch him back. And he says, I'm not a puncher. He says, I diffuse situations and send them on their way. And he says, I'm much more efficient. He goes, what is that all about? And he says, I want to talk to somebody who understands in the entertainment business, access control, risk management. How do you set up doorways and barriers to make sure that doesn't happen in the first place? Well, we know people who do that, right? So Ernie Johnson, who's the head of IDs and transportation and access at the Walt Disney Company, is having a phone call with him. And he's all like, me? The kid wants to talk to me? I'm like, he does. He asked very specifically for you. Last night on the way out of class, somebody said, oh man, the only person I would ever want to talk to, I don't even know what he does. Portfolio executive. What is that? He's way too famous. His name is Zach. And they're walking out the door and I'm like, wait, Zach Ridley? They're like, yep. I'm like, first of all, he's not scary. He's delightful. Within an hour, he had answered me and said, do you need me to come to Texas? And I'm like, whoa, simmer down. No, wait, maybe I do. But we work in an industry, but that is the norm. People are absolutely happy to talk to students. Another student wanted to talk to somebody from the Henson Studios. I have some very good friends there. And I said, like, is this the flavor you want? And she said, no, that's a business person. I want somebody who makes and uses puppets. So I have another contact. And he set the rules. He's like, yep. He goes, oh, I would love it. I'm not answering any email. I'm not doing a presentation. The students calling me and writing down in notes. And I'm like, done. And those are the experiences that are much more fruitful in the long run. Stuart Langley, who's the head of patents at the Walt Disney Company, he developed a lovely relationship with one of my students last semester, mechanical engineer. She's taking a gap year right now, and then she'll start law school in a year. And she wants to get into entertainment law. So not only did she meet somebody who does the job she's interested in, he connected her to scholarship programs. So she went to a 6-week camp for free. And so it's not just about a little sneaky peek into our industry by talking to these professionals. There's long-term relationships that happen. And I think other industries are way more competitive. We once hosted MBA students do this thing called a trek, where they arrange it themselves. And as a group, these graduate classes will move around from studios to studios or any company. Walt Disney hosts thousands of interns from Deloitte and Touche and other places. So we were hosting several schools at once, which was very dicey, right? USC and UCLA and Notre Dame were all in the room at the same time. So they come into this big room where we had set up, tables with chairs around it, tablecloths, and a set of directors' chairs up there, and most of the speakers who were business professionals at the Walt Disney Company were also alumni of these schools. So we had that connection. So as the students come in and file in, there's like a bit of a ruckus over the tablecloths. And I'm like, what? And you're like, why have you picked USC's colors? Like, so
Oh,
USC and
geez.
Notre Dame. And we're like, simmer down. That's Mickey Mouse's colors. Like you see maroon and gold, we see yellow shoes and red. But delightfully in our industry, no one's ever been mad about me showing up in my latest Universal T-shirt. They're like, "Oh, that ride is great. I wish I had that shirt." Right? We're much more collaborative. I've also started to do quite a bit of research on fandom lately, and just got a really great book called "Fandom: The Psychology of Belonging," and I got my interest was piqued on this topic. We had a presentation at the Themed Entertainment Academic Symposium from a researcher whose subject area was sports fandom. But as a result of sports, he sort of tippy-toed into others. And I don't think you'll be surprised that gaming fans are toxic, very toxic.
Yes.
Next down from them are some sort of music and other types of fandoms. By far, the politest are theme park fans. That regardless of your religious affiliation or political affiliation or even favorite park, Six Flags and Disney fans are besties. They have a shared interest. And so that got me kind of interested in the topic of fandom and how we approach it as a fan and how we interact with other fans. And this book, which is only published in May, it's a lovely book. It really talks about fandom in terms of relationships with each other, the psychological value of being part of a fandom, because that's a big part of our industry as well, right? How do you work with each other? How do you work with other guests? How do you interact with other guests? And it's a huge area, right? Like at Imagineering, I think at one point we had 280 job titles. Whereas if you're an accountant, there's not a lot of job titles you have.
Right.
So we're certainly never hitting them all, but there's quite a lot to hit. And that's a big part of what keeps us interesting as well.
Man, you hit on so much there, just because it just shows how the industry has changed and how there's just so much happening right now. Well, one other thing I wanted to ask you is we're seeing so much more themed entertainment type of exhibits at zoos or museums or even hospitals or,
Yep.
those approaches. So, I mean, how has that evolved? And I'm curious for your perspective on that because I've really noticed it at even local places where I'm like, this feels like something that would be at Disney's Animal Kingdom or wherever. It's really evolved to something different.
Human beings are, we're genetically predisposed to connect with each other, to have shared experiences, and to tell stories. And that works for everyone. And once that cat's out of the bag, you can't put it back, right? Like, why do people wait outside an Apple store overnight for a product to drop when Amazon could deliver it to you, right?
Yeah.
It's wanting to be part of that culture and that story. And that's a value to everyone. There's a few social media sites that are nailing it. By the way, national parks. I don't know if you follow the national parks on Facebook, but they're killing it.
Yeah.
Respectfully, I mean, because often they're talking about don't be a dummy, don't go near a bison. They're talking about some pretty serious topics, but they're doing it in a very approachable and conversational way. So you don't need to build a 2 billion theme park, right? You can do other ways to connect and make people understand what your values and priorities and stories are. But there's a lot more opportunity in smaller locations, like you said, in restaurants and in malls and parking lots, right? There's a lot of folks who appreciate this little bit of surprise and delight and story that's wrapped around the sorts of things that we experience every day. And consumers are expecting it and sometimes demanding it, and they will pay a premium for it. They will pay an upcharge for an experience that has a little bit of story, a little bit of guest service wrapped around it. My current favorite, obsessed with, I've actually been obsessed with them for a while, is the Savannah Bananas. Are you familiar with the Savannah Bananas?
I've heard people reference them, but I am not that familiar. So
So if you're
it's
familiar
definitely
with,
out in the
yeah,
ether.
right. It's if you're familiar with the Harlem Globetrotters, right, which was a fanciful,
Right.
imaginative take on basketball. The folks who played in the Harlem Globetrotters tended to be towards the end of their career. Savannah Bananas started as an NCAA summer league, so just starting their career. About a year ago, 2 years ago, they spun off into their own league. But minor league baseball has always done a much better job of guest service and interaction.
Yes.
Very family friendly, very affordable games, plays. For one price, you get a hot dog, a Coke, and a seat, and some entertainment. Savannah Bananas put that to 11. But they are sending 4 to 6 gentlemen a year up to the majors. Right. It is a real breeding ground for talent. But they've got a few rules. My mom, by the way, who's 96, They just were in Massachusetts and she wanted to go. She's like, because if I catch a ball, if I catch a foul ball, they're out. And I want to catch a ball and get a guy out. And I'm like, if you are resonating with my mom, who is neither a fan of bananas or sports, right? But she was super excited they were coming. They're doing a lot of things right. The purists appreciate it. No, they do not. Baseball purists are very mad at this. And I think sometimes we suffer that in themed entertainment as well. Oh, you're disrespecting whatever by throwing too much IP around. Or I was at the San Antonio Zoo the other day, and they have a chupacabra. They have a chupacabra on display. Chupacabras aren't real. And so I was like, what's happening here? It was in a very dark room where the bats are. And so that was a room that was naturally very, very dark so that the bats would be pretty active. And they suggested maybe it's a myth, maybe it's not. But I'm like, this is a zoo. I have certain expectations about here and what's not. However, in Texas and in parts of Mexico and South America, it is a very real character. It is a very real part of myth, lore, and tradition. And so they were connecting to that local story. He wasn't animatronic, right? He just was a sculpt. But he was beautifully done. He looked like a real chupacabra frozen in time. And so there's lots of different approaches to what the story is and how you're going to tell it. And then we're moving right into guests very much wanting to be part of that story. So whether it's cosplay while they're in experiences, whether it's spinning off their own sort of escape room LARPy type things, they don't just want a story wrapped around the content anymore. They very much want to be part of the story. And I think where we see this really well in other fields is holiday commercials for cars, right? When the Lexus December to Remember, whatever those ads come on, they are very much selling a lifestyle with the big red bow on the white roof with the red. And then also in Super Bowl ads. The Super Bowl ads, which is right after the holiday season, right? Late January, they are telling little mini movies, little mini stories in those ads. And you're like, why can't you do this year round? These are interesting.
Right.
And so this idea of what's the story around your product? How does that impact me? We're seeing it more and more in other mediums and then even in more physical places. Because our universe is the physical place, a place where I am. I can turn around. I can look in all directions. I'm usually with other folks. But the basic tenets of interactivity, storytelling, I'm part of the story, I matter sometimes in the story. We're going to see that more and more moving forward.
Definitely. Well, I have a not that serious question for you as we get near the end here. But so Ethan Reed told me that you are one of Marty Sklar's favorite Imagineers. So I'm curious, what was, I don't need you to explain why that is, but what was your relationship like with Marty when he was there?
Adorable, right? He's interesting. He is at the same time very grandfatherly and also takes zero crap. So he's yin and yang. So the program that I came in through, the Imaginations program, was his baby. And so he was obviously very vested in anyone who came through that. I was the first person through that program who became a senior executive. So they're like, poster child. I was also female, which was pretty poster child. But we stayed very close. He was very interested in students. But when we were there for the week of the finals, right before he'd been hired as an intern, but while we were there for the competition finals, they took us to Disney. They taught us all this stuff, right? We learned all the things. And they took us to Disneyland and assigned us an area to evaluate based on Mickey's 10 Commandments, right? Just a little quick sketch on a notepad kind of thing. And I picked the area at Disneyland between Main Street and Fantasyland, right? So you're on the backside of the Matterhorn, you got the monorail to the right.
Right.
It's kind of like the subs. You can go, if you go to the left, you're seeing the backside of Alice in Wonderland and the restrooms are there. But if you stand in the middle of that crossroads, you see nothing. You can see nothing in this direction, nothing in that direction. You have to like go around the bend. What you can see straight in front of you on the backside of the Matterhorn is a filthy monorail. It's all kinds of grease and stuff on it. So I drew a picture of that. And I made notes and I'm like anything, like lights, music, signage, a little piece of Alice like sticking out another foot so I can see like weenies, right? I just learned about weenies, like what's going to drag me to these places. So whatever, that was like on a little notepad in the park. And then we kept carrying on. The gentleman who was leading that tour for us handed my homework to Marty. And apparently that intersection has been a pet peeve of his for years. So that's when I got my first famous Marty Sklar red pen note, where he's like, how soon can we hire you. You've nailed it, kid. And I'm like, I was mortified because I think I used the word crap, right? Like I never expected anyone to see this. It was just like on note paper that we did real quick in the park. But from the get-go, he's like, I like the way you think, kid. But also, like, very rarely in our lives do we get to say that we said what we wanted to folks. And I did. Marty is the only one in my life so far. So he was still very connected to students. He was long since retired. And he sent me a note I was in Florida. So it was about 6 p.m. Florida time. He had this interesting idea and he sent like 4 or 5 of us. And I responded, I'm like, yep, great. Here's what I'll follow up. It was a student related thing. And then I replied directly to him. And I said, you have no idea how much I appreciate that we're still top of mind, right? You still care about students. You still care about education. You still care about putting your money where your mouth is and funding these sorts of things. And that's a big deal. I appreciate that. And he's like, thanks. I really like doing it. About 4 hours later, he passed away. And so he knew that I sent it because he replied. And I'm like, what? That's it. That never again in my life will I have said thank you to the right person. I tried to do better about saying thank you. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what a full circle. He invented this competition. I came through it as a kid who didn't think I belonged because I'd never heard about Imagineering or I didn't know nothing about nothing. But consistently, he made sure to touch base with his kids. He made sure to continue to support. And basically, I would do anything wacky. He asked for a lot of wackies. Did Ethan show you the video that we made for New Kid to Work Day? So I was in our Tahunga facility at the time, which is hot, sharp, dangerous, pointy things at the machine shop. And that's very inappropriate to bring children into. And so the parents who were there, they usually had to pick another department that their kids went to. But then they weren't seeing what their dads and their moms did. Marty's like, no, let's do it in Tahunga. Just figure out something safe. And I was with special effects at the time. John Polk was my boss. He's like, no, yeah, we can do this. So we took a tour of the dangerous areas and videotaped it. We made sure that every kid who was coming, their parent was in the video. And the tour of it showed them making the pieces and the parts. And then the kids got those pieces and parts and they assembled their own car and they could customize it with stickers and they put a circuit board in and they made the horns and the lights go and stuff. And so that video that we shot, like giving a tour, we had like a 15-ton crane pulling a 2-ounce piece of plastic. It was hilarious. And Marty's like, yeah, like these kids need to be included in this. Obviously, they're not going into the machine shop, but bring whatever part of the experience you can. And I look at it now, and it is comic gold. Because I'm like that old classic Bugs Bunny thing. We're like running through one door and out through. I'm doing all through the shops, running. I'm like, I gotta go to plastics, and I'm running down this. And I was all Marty. He's like, it's not really fair to these kids or their parents, right? They don't get to celebrate them. But so the next year we did it. That year they built little cars. The next year they built their own fiber optic star fields, right? So we had a bajillion little holes drilled, and they seeded these little fiber optics, and they glued them and stuff. And as they were leaving with their little prized things that they had made, putting their coats on, their parents would gather them and leave them. One kid said, "This is the best bring your kids to work day ever. Make sure you don't get laid off from this department." I'm like, oh, like that kid knows the biz. He knows how things roll. Magic. Ooh, reality.
Oh, man, that's so funny. Well, I can't think of a better way to end the podcast than with that story, MK. This has been amazing. I've really enjoyed talking with you. I probably could talk to you, like you said. You could just talk for hours, but this has been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'm happy to have anyone reach out to me if they're interested in any of the resources I've collected. Walt Disney Imagineering partnered with the Khan Academy to do Imagineering in a Box, which is a lesson for probably 8th grade, freshman year in high school level. But over the pandemic, we had lots of families do it together. So there are more resources out there than you might know, and way more resources than we had 5 or 10 years ago about folks interested in this industry, communicating with folks in the industry, and understanding what the opportunities are.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
I want to give a big thanks to Ethan Reed for initially helping to set up this podcast. You can find lots of great interviews with Imagineers like Ethan, MK, and so many others. Go to tomorrowsociety.com/podcast with an S at the end, or just search on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to shows, and there are a lot of great ones out there that I think you might enjoy. Wanted to give a big thanks to Matt Chilcote for making a contribution to the show through the Buy Me a Dole Whip. Thank you, Matt, for helping to keep this show moving forward and for buying me a Dole Whip. If you'd like to help support the show through a one-time contribution like Matt, you can go to tomorrowsociety.com/Dole Whip. You can also become an official member of the Tomorrow Society through Patreon and get access to some really cool perks, including bonus podcast episodes. Go to patreon.com Tomorrow Society to learn more. If you'd like to get a hold of me, including if you want to submit your ideas about Spaceship Earth and how you would update it, you can email me, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Send me your ideas about the show, about Spaceship Earth, about this episode, whatever you want to talk about. It's always awesome to hear from you. You can also follow me on a bunch of different social media platforms, too many to mention: Twitter, Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky. There's also a YouTube channel that you should definitely subscribe to, where I've been posting videos from a variety of parks. I also analyzed the recent Silver Dollar City announcement of a fire in the hole replacement, hoping to do more videos relating to any news from Destination D23 in the future. The music you're listening to right now was written by Adam Hookey, performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I will be giving my thoughts about whatever Disney announces at the Destination D23 event. Of course, if there's nothing, maybe not. But I think we're going to hear some exciting things. We've already heard a little bit of news related to Disneyland's Haunted Mansion. So I think we're going to see some more updates in that vein. I'll be here to talk about everything Josh D'Amaro mentions on the podcast next week. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I really appreciate it. I hope you're doing awesome and had a great Labor Day weekend. I will talk to you again very soon.